This class is basically going to cover what it means to be an assistant editor in reality TV. If you're not and don't plan on being an assistant editor in reality TV, I feel like the class is still useful because a lot of the skill set that you have as an assistant editor in other disciplines is very similar. So the things that we're going to be going over, exporting, ingesting footage, a lot of it's pretty much the same in every discipline of assistant editing. It's just that this class is specific to assistant editing in reality TV. All right, so here's what we're going to be covering today. It's kind of a full plate. So first of all, we're going to be talking about getting to know Media Composer. As I mentioned before, since the last time I did this class, Media Composer has changed considerably. So I'm going to be going through what's the current version and how to use everything the way that Media Composer 2019 and later with that interface. Creating and organizing an Avid project. Ingesting, which includes importing, linking, and transcoding. Prepping interviews for export. Script sync, which we'll talk about. Script sync is it's actually a paid module in Media Composer that is mostly just used in reality TV. It might be used in a couple other disciplines. And then lastly is building and exporting cuts. So let's go ahead and get started. So why become a reality assistant editor? There are a lot of different types of assistant editors. So why do we suggest starting out in reality TV? So the reason that I personally suggest it, I mean, it's what I did, but more than that, I suggest it because it's a great place to start. So if you're trying to get into scripted work, nearly all scripted work is union, which means that you basically have to be a member of the Editors Guild in order to work on a union show. And pretty much all scripted projects, at least the kind that you would see on TV, are union. So the union requires 100 days of non-union editing experience to join. Now, you could get that non-union editing experience in other ways. You could work on an independent film. You could work on, I don't think they consider corporate videos to qualify, but there are many other ways you could get it. So the reason that I suggest working in reality TV is because assisting in reality, number one, it pays well. The money it's pretty decent. I mean, it's not amazing, but even starting out, it can pay pretty well. But even more than that, the work is consistent. So if you were to try to get your hours another way, if you were to work on an independent feature or any kind of independent project, you always run the risk of something happening, them running out of money, an issue with the schedule where they have to break for a couple months. That's actually probably also because of money. But there's a lot of unknowns when you're working on independent projects. Whereas if you're working on a reality show, it's just like a scripted project. You get hired, from a start date, and you have an end date. And I don't think I've ever worked on a project where I didn't work that entire time. There may be occasional instances where things weren't as busy as they expected, but that's far more rare than them keeping you on longer because there's a lot more work to be done than they anticipated. I would say that has happened to me many more times. Um, so it's those two things, the pay and the work. And then lastly, it's a great opportunity to gain technical understanding and to get a foothold in the industry. So if you're interested in becoming a scripted assistant editor, it's a demanding job, but it's not particularly technically demanding. And you might say, well, then why do I need the technical expertise that I would get from being a reality assistant editor? And I would say it's a huge leg up. If you come onto a scripted project and you know how to troubleshoot and you know how the Nexus works and you know what to do if there's an error on an export in Media Composer, you're a huge asset. And it's rare to find that in scripted TV or probably scripted features. There's these days there's probably more people coming from reality TV than there used to be, but still I would say that it's a huge asset. So what exactly is the job of a reality assistant editor? So let's take a look at the big picture. So as an assistant editor, you are hired by a post producer. The post producer is hired by the executive producer who works for the production company, who is usually hired by the network to make the show, or the production company will sometimes create the show themselves and then pull the network in for financing. So where do the editors fit into this picture? So we have assistant editors at the bottom. So the editor actually, unlike in scripted, where the assistant editor is often hired as the assistant to the editor, in reality projects, the assistant editors help the editor, but they're really more media managers and sort of an independent worker than an assistant to the editor. Because there's a lot more media management and a lot more organization that needs to be done that has nothing to do with the editor's work. And so going back to scripted, on a scripted project, as an assistant editor, in some ways, you're sort of a junior editor. That is not true at all in reality TV. In reality TV, you have a completely different job from the editor. You will never edit anything as an assistant editor in reality TV. Your job is specifically focused on prepping media and dealing with exports and scripts and things like that. So as an assistant editor, you help the editors. But there's also another role that is unique to reality TV, which is, since reality TV does not have any scripts, the story actually has to be put together after the fact. So the story has to be put together while the footage is being gone through. So someone has to sit there and look through all the footage and figure out, okay, so we wanted this show to be about, the struggles that people have living in a house together, but like what struggles actually happened, because that's really the story. So you actually have a position in reality TV called a story producer. And the job of the story producer is to go through the footage and to look for things that can be basically plot lines, things that happen between, we'll just call them characters. I mean, they're actually just people, but things that happen between different people, and identify what could really be like the meat of the show. And as an assistant editor, it's also your job to make sure that the story producers have what they need, because they're going through the footage just like the editor, except usually they're going through it even before the editor is. All right, so as an assistant editor, how big of a team would you be working as on a show? Like, would you come onto a show and there'd only be you as the assistant editor and nobody else? Probably not. If you're working on anything larger than probably an independent project, then you will either be on a small, a medium, or a large or stage show. So with a small show, you're usually looking at a lead assist who works days, and then maybe a night assist. Then on a medium show, you would likely have a lead assist and then a second day assist, and then maybe 2 night assists. Obviously, these numbers aren't hard and fast. You will have variations on all of this, but this sort of gives you a general idea of how many people will be on the project with you doing the same kind of work. And then lastly, on a large show, like a stage show, you would have a lead assist and 2 day assists and 3 night assists or more. Actually, 2 or more day assists and 3 or more night assists. So for a period of time, I worked on the show The Voice, and I think we had 4 people on days and something like 6 people on nights. It was a beast. So on a project like that, you will have a big team. So what are the responsibilities of an assistant editor? So number one is setting up projects. You'll notice that this has a star next to it. Anything that I've put a star on in here is something that would usually be done by the lead assistant editor. If you're on a project where you're the only assistant editor, obviously you would be doing these things because you're basically the lead. But if you're on a project where you are not the only assistant editor and you have less experience, you are probably not the lead, which means these are things that you could lean on somebody else for. So setting up projects, ingesting media, organizing and grouping that media, script sync, managing media and storage. If you're working on a Nexus, that would mean making sure that the drives don't fill up, things like that. That's usually done, or creating new drives. That's usually done by more of a lead assist. Graphics, so that'd be importing graphics, outputs, troubleshooting, and upres and online prep. And again, upres and online prep is usually done by a lead or someone who's more senior, because it's a more complicated process and it doesn't really have to be done by every assistant editor. And then wrapping out a show, which basically means taking all the media that's on the drives, sometimes writing them to other drives that you then send to the production company. And then, that's what you would mostly do as an assistant editor. And then the coordinators and post-producers will have to submit paperwork with all the information about, all cuts and things like that. Okay, so this is the responsibilities of an assistant editor. Let's talk a little bit more about the process itself. So the process is that as far as what you would do as an assistant editor, media comes from production, and that goes to the assistant editor. The assistant editor will then transcode, log, and group that footage. Then any graphics and music that come in will be ingested by the assistant editor. Then once that footage is transcoded, logged, and grouped, those groups will be given to the editors and the story producers. And then any footage that was received will be gone through, and any interviews will be found and exported for transcription. Those interviews will come back to editorial, and then they will be script synced back to the media and handed off to the story producers and editors so that they can use them for reference. From there, the editors will generate cuts, and then the assistant editor or assistant editors will export cuts to send to the producer, the production company, and the network. Generally, the order of those cuts, at least for reality TV, is rough cut, fine cut, network cut, lock cut. So a rough cut is what's in scripted called the editor's cut, and it's basically a first pass at the cut of the show. A fine cut is usually once the producers come in and take a look and give their notes. Then the network cut goes out to the network, they give their notes, and then the show finally locks. And then lastly, once the show locks, the assists will upres the footage and prep it for online. Why would you need online? So the reason that you need the online process in post is because in general, the way that we work is what's called an offline workflow. And the way that an offline workflow works, you always shoot the highest quality media in production. So that's the highest bit rate possible, the widest color space, and then when the media gets to editorial, it has to be played back through an NLE. So with most reality projects, that would be Media Composer. And in general, if you're shooting something like Red or even high bitrate ProRes, you're not going to want to edit those full res, full bitrate files in Media Composer. And so what you do is you actually transcode that high quality media to lower quality media. As I mentioned before, this is called the offline workflow. So the idea here is that instead of working with the original camera media, you're working with low res proxies of the media And then at the very end, you go through an upres process and hand it off to online, who then creates a high quality, but not as high of quality as the original camera masters. Does anybody have any questions about that process?
One quick question. Do you think sometime during this, not to complicate things, because this is a very streamlined thing, where the role of media managers or DIT, because that's like one of those rare positions where you have somebody kind of working on set who's one step down from an assist, basically. You don't see it too often, but will we touch base on some of their extra responsibilities as far as the offline and proxies and transcoding, or?
No, not really. The DIT position, uh, in the way that you're thinking of, is something that's done much more in unscripted projects. So in reality TV,
Yeah.
usually the transcoding, this whole process of generating low quality media and then upresing back to the high res footage, is actually done by you, the assistant editor. There's no DIT. There's a media manager on set who will offload all the media, all the camera masters, and then they will send them directly to you. You will link to them in Avid and transcode them. On a scripted project, what will usually happen is you will either have a DIT who does all that on set and then sends you the already transcoded proxies, or the media will go to a dailies house who will do that same process and then send you the transcoded proxies overnight. So on a scripted project, someone does the transcoding for you. On a reality project, most of the time, I would say pretty much all the time, the assistant editor is the one who is creating that low res media.